checkmate Eagle 5-1 for confirmation, confirm anchor.
Source 52-1772.
Hot haul.
And it goes left. Now we're on, let's do it. 1-2's off, right press. Engage. 932 Tony.
Hello and welcome back to the DCS SITREP. I'm your host, Prickly Hedgehog. Here we are once again talking DCS news from Eagle Dynamics and its various third-party affiliates. We're going to focus today on more information that the Eagle Dynamics team provided with regards to map optimization. Remember, we discussed this previously, but they've given us a little bit more information in terms of how much space we could potentially see saved in order to install some of those big maps and the multiple maps that we have in conjunction with many of the modules that we now have in game. And as we discussed previously, for some players, this is becoming a little bit of a problem with the large sizes of some of the files that we have. Disk space becomes a little bit of a premium. So what has the team said here? Well, again, they have discussed the fact that many of us have raised concerns about the growing storage requirements of DCS terrain modules. And so as a result, they've come up with a solution which is ongoing. So they're exploring new terrain optimization methods, which will reduce the size of our terrain modules while still preserving the high visual standards that you would expect from DCS maps, especially some of the newer maps. I think that's important because we do have some older maps that probably need a little bit of work. Now, one of the most promising advances is in texture compression, they say, which is already helping them reduce storage needs with little to no impact on image quality. So it's really a twofer here in terms of that, which is good news. Now, the internal testing they go on to point out is showing them 25 to 30% disk space savings on maps like Afghanistan, and they're encouraged that these numbers will improve further as the technology matures. So still a bit of a work in progress, which means it's perhaps not quite ready to introduce. So keep tuned. Hopefully we'll see it soon. Anyway, they went on to say that the exact savings will, of course, depend on how each map was originally constructed and the tools used during its development. So this may not have a major impact on some of the older maps, and that's what they go on to say here. So the biggest winners, again, are the latest larger terrains that feature high detailed textures. As mentioned, Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. And Syria, remember, is about to get an expansion, which is exciting. And also, I think down the pipeline here by the end of the month, we're going to see DCS Balkans from Onred Tech. That was the hinted possible early access around May 31 here, so really only a week away. So that will also presumably take advantage of this, which is good news. Now, again, as I said, on the other hand, maps like Marianas, the channel, they use different rendering approaches, so the install sizes are already on the smaller side. Now, much older maps like Caucasus, you're really not going to see much change because they were built with smaller textures anyway and lower density from the get-go. So the good news is that basically those maps, or at least Caucasus, is really a pretty small footprint compared to the newer maps, so less of an impact there. They plan to introduce these optimizations in the very near future once the technology is finalized and they're happy with the results. In addition to reducing the install sizes, they're also working on broader improvements to terrain quality and capabilities as part of their ongoing commitment to advances in DCS terrain technology. Now, this is, remember, something that's been going on for a while. We saw some optimization with the GPU side of things to improve the performance of the game. Any iterations that we have along those lines, both the footprint and also the details of the map, that a lot of people are looking forward to or want more fleshing out. Some people less concerned about the space that some of these maps take up if they can have more detail. Of course, it's all, a little bit of a balancing act. And the more detail you have, the larger the loading times, the potential for optimization issues or performance issues. We've got very high detailed modules as well. So all of these things are going to have an impact on the overall performance. You include a lot of detail, then you start running into FPS issues, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a little bit of a give and take, one from one pile, some from another, to get something, broadly speaking, that is proficient enough to make sure that the game runs well. But again, like I said, anything that improves the core elements of the game, like the terrain maps, then this has to be a good thing. So stay tuned for more information on that. I'm pretty positive about this, very enthusiastic. I certainly enjoy high detailed maps. The visual experience is really immersive and fun. And again, if it doesn't break the bank in terms of overall performance, then that's a good thing.
You're way too fast.
Let's turn to a brand new campaign coming. This is also by SOB Simulations, who previously did the F-16 II Pacific 2025 campaign. I've gone through 3 or 4, or maybe 4 or 5 of the missions there, and I haven't had a chance to finish that campaign off. Thoroughly enjoyable. He did a great job. So this is the addition, if you like, to that particular series, and it is the A-10C II Tank Killer Century Pacific 26, one last ride. So you will strap into the legendary A-10C Warthog as a test pilot with the Air National Guard as part of the Reserve Command Test Center, or AATC, deployed to the beautifully updated DCS Mariana map for Century Pacific 26, one last ride. This compelling story-driven campaign unfolds across 13 carefully designed sorties drawn from today's headlines, where you'll fly everything from test profiles to combat employment exercises. Each mission is built around real-world US Air Force A&G procedures, but streamlined where it counts to feel authentic without burying you in unnecessary complexity. At its core, One Last Ride parallels the, as mentioned, Century Pacific 25 Viper campaign, while asking one question: does the A-10C still belong in the fight? With retirement looming in the real world, every sortie is a test where you can prove it still matters or fly it on a one last ride to the boneyard, which a lot of people are arguing there really isn't a current platform that betters, although they are trying to work around some of those issues. But it's a tried and true platform, and it has resisted, if you like, the A-10 political interference and efforts to retire it. It is still the best CSAR and CAS aircraft probably in the Air Force arsenal, and that Avenger cannon is absolutely phenomenal. And again, it's a tried and tested piece of equipment. As a platform, it's very, very hard to beat. Anyway, back to the campaign. It's written by a 30-year US Air Force veteran. One Last Ride leans into character, pacing, and atmosphere. Like a premium miniseries, the voices on the radio become people you've flown for years with. Missions play out like episodes, some lighter, some tense, some unexpectedly funny, but all feeding a larger arc that ties directly into its sister Century Pacific 25 campaign. 2 stories, 1 timeline, so to speak. Now, whether this is your first DCS Tank Killer campaign or your 10th, the design walks a deliberate line, real procedures where they matter, flexibility where they don't. You'll learn, improve, and stay engaged without feeling like you need a stack of manuals to keep up. And that certainly can be the feeling with the A-10C. Now, because at the end of the day, it should be real, but it also should be fun to fly, which I agree with. Now, here are some of the key features, which we've kind of covered, but 13 story-driven missions with varied pacing and objectives to keep you on your toes, real-world procedures presented in practical, approachable, and flyable manners, and 3,100 fully voiced lines bring the campaign and its characters to life, 40-plus detailed custom aircraft and ground unit liveries, 215-plus pages of briefing materials and info on the kneeboards for those who want to dig deep, procedural checklists that support mission flow without slowing you down, and then lastly, a narrative-focused, non-combat heavy experience delivering fun when it counts. So very excited to see that introduced in the game. And SOB's already established himself as somebody who can produce really good campaigns, so stay tuned for more on that. Presumably coming in the next patch, along with a boatload of other stuff that we have seen mentioned or looming in the wings here, waiting to be pushed into the game. One last thing they plugged here was the Panther Den dynamic PvE multiplayer campaign server, which is packed with high-stakes modern threats, challenging AI logic, and an enemy that aggressively fights back. Mission theaters have included the Cola map, or UCOM, DCS Afghanistan map, CENTCOM, and currently DCS Syria map, also CENTCOM. All of these focus on modern-day force-on-force scenarios. Each campaign is meticulously designed using the entire terrain and open source intel that honors the region's history, operational realities, and immersive dynamic battlefield experiences. Logistics is the backbone of Panther Den, requiring players to deliver fuel, weapons, troops, and air defenses. You can even escort a ground convoy in combined arms. How cool was that? Now, with a strong focus on communication and teamwork, Panther Den welcomes new and experienced pilots alike. Additionally, they run a DCS Nevada test and training range map. That server includes simulated versions of 4 complexes across NTTR, Edwards Air Force Base, Utah Test and Training Range, and the Fallon Range Training Complex. I know we've talked about Fallon. It would be nice to have that in there fleshed out, but I think the map, according to WAGs at least, uses that old technology that we were referencing at the beginning of the video, so it needs to be overhauled for the current game. Unfortunately, they'd have to build it from scratch, which I think, might be a realistic prospect, but we'll have to wait and see. Obviously, there's other things in the pipeline ahead of that in terms of maps, so again, stay tuned, because for starters, we're going to have Balkans here very quickly from OnReTech. So I'll post a link to the Discord if you're interested in that particular server. There's so many of them out there, so the world's your oyster, depending on what you want to do in game in terms of multiplayer. So that brings the newsletter roughly to a close. However, there are some other things going on in the community. One was Octopus G showcased a couple of assets that it is going to put into the game for accompanying the LA7, which was released earlier this year. And I think we're going to see more of that thanks to the work that ED did in allowing people access to the assets development software with the Blender template, for want of a better term, is now available. So that is going to see, I think, more of that kind of stuff where teams are producing assets to release as part of the modules that they're producing. And of course, then there'll be community input as well. And some of that we've already seen a little bit of. Some of the current Hill asset pack, for example, has been as a result of a third party deciding, I'm going to produce a bunch of stuff, and ED's picked up on it, and now they've entered into the game. We're seeing a little bit more of that in terms of ED opening up and allowing that to occur more seamlessly for those of you who enjoy that particular work, which is good. Also, I'm going to hit you up here with some pictures from OnReTech and the Balkans map, which is looking pretty slick. We'll have to wait and see what the final product looks like, or at least the early access product, because it's a map that has garnered some attention. It pulls us back into the European theater and more of a green map rather than some of the more desert-like environments that people have complained about. Although I think some of the desert maps, or so-called desert maps, are far more varied than that overarching description. Afghanistan and Iraq, case in point here, particularly Iraq. It's got some pretty cool features, so I'm looking forward to seeing further flesh out of that particular map in the very, very near future, as discussed last week. So stay tuned for more news and information as it comes to hand. We're rocking into the summer here, and we should see some more things being injected in to the game in 2026. Modules, maps, and other like optimizations. So cool stuff. That'll do. We'll see you next time. Cheers.